Good afternoon, everyone. I'm calling to order this meeting of the Curriculum Instruction and Assessment Committee. I'm Gary Houchins, the committee chair. I also have Vice Chair Milton Seymour, who serves on this committee with me. As Chairman Heiner noted earlier, we do not have a quorum for this meeting, and therefore we will not be taking any action. However, we will review all of the items that are on the committee's agenda and bring those to the full board for vote tomorrow. So just making it clear, again, the committee is not taking votes on anything today. We're reviewing these. We'll report back to the full board and ask them to enter motion, seconds, and approval for our action items tomorrow. Because the commissioner wants to be in a couple of different places during these committee meetings, we're actually going to take things a little bit out of order and jump down to the first of our review items, which is amendment to 703 KAR 5140. This is requirements for school district report cards. Associate Commissioner Sims, if you're okay to go ahead and speak to that one. Also, David Couch is with us, Jennifer Stafford, and Dee Dee Connor.
And then I think Dee Dee probably thought, oh, I have a little time, so she probably.
She went out to help.
I'll go do it. I'll go get it.
Took her by surprise.
That's right, that's fine.
This is a good surprise.
Absolutely.
This is a
Absolutely.
good surprise. We're excited about this.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So we'll go ahead and get started. Just to kind of do an introduction, and we'll have Dee Dee time to get to the table with us. We have two offices represented here today to talk about this amendment. And to give just a little bit of background, the school report card has really grown in what it includes over time. Our very first experiences with the report card, it was pretty much a way to report assessment and accountability results. And then over time, we began to give more detail, more information about schools, and then a federal requirement for a school report card came along. So Kentucky actually had a card before there was a federal requirement to have a card. And Commissioner Couch and I, Associate Commissioner, this is a project, we are part of the team that works with it, but many offices are involved with the school report card. So we're just the two sort of bringing that work forward today. And our policy folks have organized staff to offer amendments and change. Also I'll remind you, there's a lot of reasons you open a reg or move forward with a reg. And occasionally it's because you have a big change, something with accountability. But also they can be opened on a time frame. This reg was getting ready to expire. So we needed to revisit it so that we could get it renewed and move forward, because it is work federally and state were required to do. So again, we're just kind of representatives to a bigger, much bigger team of people at KBE that work with it. And if you ask a really specific detail, we might be looking back in the audience for someone to help us answer that today. Our office obviously does the school and the assessment and accountability data. David's office does a lot of work with the management of the report card contract and our vendor Brightbot. So David, I don't know if you have any kind of opening things you'd want to share with the group as well.
And the data elements itself. So we champion Infinite Campus, which does a lot to populate it. And we have a data governance committee that works with all the data stewards, the different program areas and KD agencies. So, and we say we work with Brightbytes to bring it together. So we're more on the air traffic controller for all the data elements in KD agency, and then bringing it within a digital format, but also working with all the different program areas, because they truly have the expertise on that a specific data element within the report card.
And Dee Dee, we just waited until you left the building.
I thought y'all could cover it without me. I was like, how many copies? That's much.
Dee Dee also works as the connection in the department to the federal report card work, because there are federal rules, and obviously there are meetings around those federal contracts, and so Dee Dee has that expertise in that work as well. And obviously Jennifer is riding herd on a little assessment and accountability as well as other pieces of the system. I think we're going to start out. Jennifer's going to kind of lead us through just a really high level of the kinds of things you would see changes here. And if you're okay, we'll just highlight a couple of things from rather than go through every line by line. But we also want to spend some time on Section 5, which is the new piece.
So thank you, Rhonda. We're bringing forward this amendment to update it. We want to refresh it. We want to bring in new terminology, update the definitions, specifically on defining the membership of the school and what membership means as far as the kindergarten through 12th grade, and the definitions and calculations of which we use predominantly in the school report card. Also, the school and district card as well, and have it in a prominent location as to what those definitions are. We also want to replace the references to the old accountability system. There were some technical terms in there that we are no longer using. We're not utilizing in the new 5-star accountability system. So we do want to update the references in the regulation to what we are currently using for our accountability. We're updating requirements of the school report card because, as Rhonda mentioned, there are state and federal requirements in the card that need to be updated and in line with both federal and state regulations and statutes. So we're aligning this regulation to the other federal and state laws that we are having to, this card meets those requirements. We're also updating what the school and report card, those pieces that are requirements for the school as well as the district card. So there's updates to that in there. And then we're adding a new section on which is section 5. I think that Rhonda wants to go into a little bit more, bringing the accountability ratings and into a prominent location in the school. So I'll let Rhonda talk
Sure.
a little bit more about that piece.
Sure. And so most of the changes, if you look at the changes we're proposing on pages 1 of the reg and 2, you'll see repeatedly the reference back to membership, which is a point in time of who is in the school and enrolled. It's at the end of the school year, which is more stable, accurate data than other earlier points in the school year time, like beginning of school year time. So on the first pages, you'll see references to the actually which part of the statute. And Joette, if you'll scroll on down a little bit to like page 2 and 3, on page 2, you'll see that most of the changes there are the reference to membership. Then you'll see that word repeatedly used throughout, and the prominent location, which comes into play in this new section 5. That is really all that's different on page 2. On page 3, again, just as a high level, we have, again, the same kind of references to the proper section of the statute. On page 4, I do want to mention on page 4, line 4, we talk about school safety incidents. That's the term that's used in the report card. Now, we don't define incident in the reg because the rule around regs, if you're using the word like it's used by Webster in the dictionary, you don't need to define it. And that's how it's being used. So it's not defined separately, but this also references that in addition to safety violations, we're required to report as part of the civil rights data collection and other reporting mechanisms. So this puts us in alignment with what we're already doing with some civil rights reporting. And so that, again, updates that language. You'll notice that we talk about parental measures, but there it's just a rephrasing of the text. It's not changing any meaning there. And we've also rephrased so that we're using the proper term for school-based decision-making and using that consistently as well. That takes us up to page 5. I will remind you that the card covers multiple years of data. So several times we use the term base year, which is the year of the assessment results, but yet we're releasing that right just here a few days ago, and the current principal and the current contacts have to be for the upcoming school year. So we always get a few questions and confusion around that, but that is consistent with federal expectations and consistent with our history with the card, but you'll see that there as well. Moving on to page 6, we really there are, we just have a slight change of language around data verification and publication. And you can see it's just a wording change. It doesn't change meaning. We do talk about professional qualification of teachers. And there again, we're using the word like it would be used in the dictionary. Just what are those things that we use to find, such as credentialing, certification. But the real, I think, more significant change is what we find at the bottom, starting at the bottom of page 6, which is this new section 5. And it really puts in place some new reporting requirements that are follow-up for school level and district level folks to do. And you may remember that some conversation happened at the last board meeting around parents being clearly aware of what the ratings of the school might be. You know, that's very much been in the media in the last few days, and everything's out and available and online and working through the report card online version. But there was some conversation about making sure that there's a transparency there and that parents are aware of the status of the school. So we have added and crafted a new section 5 for that purpose. So I think we want to take just a little time to go through that with you and get your thoughts on it. All the other pieces, I think, are really just very much updating it to federal law, making sure all the connections are right to statute. I don't know if anybody has anything they would add before we get to that section. Okay. So section 5, we are talking about that each public or secondary school, meaning all K-12, they would display the overall school accountability classification in a prominent location. And so we defined prominent. We said that was an entryway, a place, a part of the building where parents and other stakeholders are frequently visiting, coming into the building. And it talks about that, and we used a general term there. We didn't say your star rating, because again, that's very specific to the current accountability. So this really needs to be a more general language to live with any accountability system that might be in play. Now, you'll notice there's an or at the end of that line 23 on page 6 at the bottom. So one thing that's required is you can have this in a prominent location, or you may choose for the principal in collaboration with the council to hold an advertised public meeting where it would be available to parents, to community members, to discuss what your current status is and maybe your plan for either maintaining that or improving that status. So I'll pause there, since this is the most change of the whole reg, to see if we have other comments or questions from you at that point.
So the written notification that is in the next section.
And the
or
written
subsection,
notification is the
that's in
next.
addition to whatever else, whether the school
Right.
decides to do a
Right.
display or whether they decide to do the
That's
public
right.
meeting, they're
That's
still
right.
required to do this
So
written
you do one of
notification.
the pieces of one, either A or the B, so the meeting or the display. And then the second piece is you do notify the parents in written communication. It said each school can provide, and we say 30 days with the public release. And also there we include parent or legal guardian, which you see throughout the reg. And it should include your current status with both federal and state system and any link to the report card, any additional information you might want to share about your school, or how could I be involved as a parent? How can I be more supportive of the school? Or here's some things we'd encourage you to do or be a part of. You know, I think it's an opportunity to tell a bit of their story and invite people to come be part of the work as well. So we did the third piece, 3, kind of continues that same idea. We do sometimes have changes to a status of a school after that final round of data cleanup. Now, that's just started
Yesterday.
October
1st,
1,
yeah.
and it's a 10-day calendar window, so we'll be getting changes coming into our office. Many times it's changing a student to that shouldn't have been in your accountability or should have been that didn't get caught in those earlier opportunities. And it can make a difference, and it can change someone's status. So we think it's important, either direction your status changes. It isn't always positive, but if that you resubmit that information so that you give an update and not just stand on the first thing that went out. So really that's, I think in a summary, that's the big pieces. It's display or have a meeting, So that invites conversation probably and more awareness. It's written notification to the parent, and if you have a change of status, you need to update that notification. Now, we have been in front of LSAC with this, and we've also been in front of SCAC, the School Curriculum Assessment Accountability. So both groups had some questions. They asked a couple of things about clarifying the role of parents and guardian, and we were doing do a little double check on that with some title requirements. I would think most of the things were around who should make the decision about how do we do this. Do we do a display or do we have a meeting? LSAC would like to see superintendents involved with that decision.
And I agreed. I said to the superintendents at the LSAC meeting that,
And to anybody who's watching, that the LSAC is the Local Superintendent's Advisory Council, which advises the commissioner and the staff on all the proposals or regulations that come through.
That's
Yes,
right.
sir.
Sorry.
so I said to the superintendents in LSAC that as we crafted the language, at least in my head, I always envisioned the superintendent making that decision, but their point was well taken. And if it's not explicitly stated, then the question could be, well, is it the superintendent or does the school get to make the decision at the local level? My recommendation, and I think it was pretty clear from the LSAC as well, is that decision-making point would be the superintendent.
So for another reading on this, we might have clarifying language added about that.
If the board would like to, the committee would like to go in that direction, then we could certainly add that clarification. I think the other thing that came up, could written notification be electronic versus paper copy? And I think everyone's feeling was we're in a pretty technology-oriented age. So yes, that could be.
Yeah, really wanted to see what the board's thoughts were
We'll just see,
on
see if what
that.
your thought is on that. Schools use different means of reaching out, and, some obviously have already sent some information out to their parents, probably.
Right, I
So
imagine so.
those were really, I think, the two conversations. Does anyone else remember anything specific, either from SCAC or LSAC?
It was more clarifying questions and
Right.
understanding from
Okay.
our staff.
There was
Was
a
it-
couple of comments, they liked the idea of having a choice.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That they could do a display or a meeting. Obviously, the meeting, I think, gives a lot more opportunity to interact about your data and look at the positives and the negatives and talk again about how to involve the community and the parents. So that was at least mentioned at LSAC, that people liked having the or statement, the choice.
One of the clarifying questions from LSAC as well was whether the school-based meeting could be in conjunction with the SBDM council meeting, to which we responded, we didn't see any reason why
Right.
it wouldn't be, because those are public meetings at the school level.
Would make sense. I guess, and then the district would have the discretion of deciding if that was going to be the case or if they wanted to do something separate. Right. Speaking for myself, and Milton can weigh in on this if he'd like, I think this is a great addition to the regulation. What I imagine is that schools that are classified as 4 or 5 stars will probably go with the prominent display, and schools that have lower ratings may opt to do the public meeting, and I think that is fine. One of the things, as we've talked about, how parents and the public and educators should think about the 5-star ratings that we've emphasized over and over again, is that rating should be the starting point of a conversation, a rich local conversation about what our schools are doing well and the areas in which they're struggling, so that everybody in that community can rally around the school and support it in its improvement efforts. And so this represents, I think, a great opportunity to start that conversation at the local level. And I hope that schools and districts will be enthusiastic about utilizing that option.
I think so.
I also feel that it's a great conversation piece that yesterday publishing all the stars, and people in the community is going to ask why we didn't get a 5 or
Sure.
why we are 1 or 3. And I think this is a great start for something that can change, and I believe it will do something to rally the community around some of those schools.
Sure.
One of the things I think is important on the written communication is that it needs to include a link to the school report card.
Right.
And that's specifically the KDE school report card, because a lot of folks across the state are accessing schools' ratings, as we talked about, David, through newspapers.
Yeah.
And if you access the rating only through, prominent newspaper databases, they don't include nearly all the information that's on the school report card. And there are folks in communities today that think the only thing we've done with this new accountability system is give schools a 5-star, a rating of 1 through 5 stars, without providing all the additional indicators. And so having that link, I think, is really important.
I would, speaking again for myself, I would support the idea that the superintendent would make this decision, and that electronic communication would be an acceptable alternative for notification. Milton, anything else on this you want to speak to?
I'm fine.
Okay. So because this is first read, there'll not be any action even on the part of the full board tomorrow. So
That's
we'll
right.
just make the full board aware
That's right.
that this was reviewed today. And then, of course, we'll just have you guys on standby if there are any questions
Sure,
that
we'll
they
be-
want.
we'll
they
definitely
wanna
be here.
ask. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Appreciate
Thank
your work
you.
on this.
Thank you.
And Rhonda, let me commend you and your team
Oh.
for all the great work that has gone into preparing the new accountability system. We'll give you a shout out tomorrow about that too.
Well, thank you.
been great.
You see Jennifer and I and Kevin tomorrow, but
Yes.
we have a whole crew back there
We do.
working hard
I
every
know
day.
you do.
Thank
And
you so
appreciate them
much.
all.
And then
Great teamwork
Dee
here.
Dee, Gary, has led our work on the school report
Report card
card.
piece.
Yes, that's,
Part of that as well.
and I love
She-
it. It's
she-
terrific. Thank
yeah.
you. Good deal. Okay, so going back to our regular agenda, the first item on here was a new regulation that we're considering. This is 704KR 8080, required academic standards in career studies. This will tomorrow be our second reading before the full board. We have Pam Moore and Teresa Rogers here to speak to us on this one.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's good to be back with you all. This will be somewhat brief. You all did have the opportunity to look at this reg and the movement that we had made on it back at the August board meeting. After that board meeting, there was a recommendation that we provide some clarity in the grade band overviews. So there were actually no changes to the standards themselves, but Teresa and the team did go back and look at the other academic standards to ensure that there was that consistency and clarity in those grade band overviews. So, as you know, this is to adopt the Kentucky Academic Standards for Career Studies. So if you have any questions on that, we can address those.
No, I think it's always important to clarify that these standards are not assessed by the state as a part of accountability. So this is a structure that we've put into place to assist schools as they address these career studies concepts that they're required by law to teach, and to give them some framework by which they could actually design instruction around that. And so I think this will be extraordinarily useful to schools, and we appreciate all the work that has gone into it.
And one of the things that the team's been very intentional about as we look at career and technical education programming and what we're doing around career exploration and diving into that for the middle school is ensuring that we're linking that back to the career studies standards, and specifically that financial literacy strand that we placed in the career studies standards.
Very good.
Okay?
Thank you. Milton, anything?
No, fine.
All right,
Okay.
thank you both.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So we're here for the next one.
Oh, you're here for the next one too? Okay, great. So the next item is amendment to 704KR3303. These are required academic standards also. So tell us about this
Correct.
one.
So this is just a matter of cleaning up some language in that reg to strike, or to amend the reg and strike all former references of the previous vocational studies standards because of the establishment of the new reg.
Right. Thank you. Just making notes to myself here so we can speak to this tomorrow if need be.
Okay.
All right, and this is something that we've done each time we've had a new set of standards come before the board for approval, is that we've had to amend the existing standards to change that language, so,
Correct.
all right.
Okay,
Very
and
good.
we'll be here tomorrow.
Thank you.
If there are any
Appreciate
questions.
that. I imagine there might be a question or two, so
Thank you.
appreciate you all being on deck for that. Okay, next we have an amendment to 780 KAR 2040. This is the Live Works project, and we have Tom Thompson here. Hey, Tom.
Good afternoon.
Hey there.
So, live work projects has to do with, this particular regulation has to do with the area technology centers, and the live work is referring to, say if a community member wanted a vehicle worked on or an oil change or something, then this is the guiding document for that. But most of the changes in this have to do with just cleaning up the regulation. It's part of our regular process of that. Most of it has to do with when we moved from the Kentucky Cabinet for Education and Workforce Development into the Department of Education, then of course the regulation numbering changed, and then there's some language that we cleaned up, gender neutral language that we cleaned up, and there was one particular area that there was a reference that was incorrect that we changed.
Okay.
This is a second read, and I think you all have had a chance to look it over. If you've got any questions, and I'd be happy to entertain those.
No questions at this time?
No, I have not.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. We'll bring it to the full board tomorrow. Thanks.
I've got the next one, too.
And you've got the next one as well. This is an amendment to 780 KAR 2060, Discipline of Students.
And this is the same goes for this one. It's just cleaning up the language. When we took it before LSAC the first time, there was a little bit of question about how it impacted students with disabilities, and we cleared up some of that, but at neither point did they want any changes made. They were just asking questions about it. And then, again, the numbering of the regulation has been changed.
Very good.
Questions?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, and next, we have KSD Advisory Board appointments, Kentucky School for the Deaf Advisory Board appointments. We have Greta Hilton and Kevin Stoll here for that. Hey there.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. As you know, we're required by statute to have a 9-member advisory council at KSD, and on the vacancies that occur, we need to come to you for appointments. We've shared 4 with you today, 1 as a parent, 2 as members at large, and 1 as a professional. I think you've had a chance to see information about them, and happy to answer any questions if you have any about them.
They all look like they're highly engaged stakeholders, so looks like a good group.
We think so.
All right. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Commissioner, we've moved through all the items that will be action items tomorrow, so we just have a couple more of our review items to discuss. The first one is an amendment to 704 KAR 7090, Homeless Children and Youth Education Program. When this is considered or reviewed by the full board tomorrow, it will be considered a first reading. And we have Associate Commissioner Kelly Foster here, and Tara Rodriguez, and Whitney Crow as well.
We've got too many chairs, we don't know where to sit. Good afternoon.
Hi there.
I have with me the Director, Tara Rodriguez, and my Policy Advisor you met before, Whitney Crow. And they're going to talk a little bit about the changes of the reg that basically due to the House Bill 378 that was passed in the last session, we're making some changes to align. So I'll hand that over to Tara and Whitney.
Yeah, if it's all right, we're not going to go through every single change in the regulation, but
appreciate
but I did want to just highlight a couple of the more substantive changes. As Dr. Foster said, we had a legislative change this past session that required the Kentucky Board of Education through regulation to improve the educational outcomes of homeless students in 3 primary ways. The first is to ensure that homeless students that they are awarded credit, including partial credit for coursework that's been successfully completed in a prior district that they transferred from. We also have to help ensure that any student who was previously enrolled in a course required for high school graduation has the opportunity in their new district of enrollment, to the extent practicable, to complete that course prior to the next school year. And then the final way that we have to further those educational outcomes for those students is to allow the homeless students to acquire their high school diploma if they've completed their second year of high school and either, one, meet the graduation requirements from the district they're transferring from, or if they meet the graduation requirements that are minimally set by the Kentucky Board of Education. So that is why we opened the reg up and why we made some amendments. The crux of those amendments are in Section 2, implementing that House Bill 378 language on pages 7 through 9 of the regulation. And you can see that we really did not, we left a lot of discretion, I would say, to the local districts. They are going to be required to have a methodology for awarding credit, including partial credit, but we're not going to specify you have to award it down to the 1/8 of the hour or something of that nature, but we are going to expect them to have those procedures in place. Also expect the local districts to have procedures in place that lessen the impact of transfers for homeless students. So it could be things like ensuring priority placement in classes required for high school graduation. We've also included some more aspirational requirements, things that we're not going to mandate necessarily, I shouldn't have called those requirements, but more aspirational goals, things that we encourage districts to adopt, including providing priority placement in extracurricular activities or providing for flexible credit accrual, things of those nature to, again, help those particularly transient population of students acquire their high school diploma as quickly as possible without having to do duplicative work or losing credits simply because they are moving from district to district. If there are questions about those changes, certainly Dr. Rodriguez and her team put those together, best practices, looking at what other states have done, and she'll be happy to answer those questions. But otherwise, I'll cover just quickly 2 other changes of the regulation.
So what specifically of this is stipulated within House Bill 378?
So House Bill 378 required, it didn't require specifically how we were going to go about ensuring that credit, including partial credit, is awarded to homeless students. It deferred that to the Kentucky Board of Education.
Okay.
So then Dr. Rodriguez and her team put together those best practices of how can we at this level help districts ensure that they're meeting those expectations of House Bill 378.
So what's the scenario that this is really trying to address? So you have a student who has done all of the required coursework, but credit hasn't been granted officially, and then they switch districts?
I think as well, if a student's transferring from one district to another, maybe they were in a course that was very comparable to one that the receiving district, but maybe it's a different course code or something of that nature. So just ensuring that the work that they've done that is comparable, that they're not being penalized and saying, well, you have to start from scratch on this particular course. You're going to be awarding, giving credit at least partially and allowing them to finish, especially those courses required for high school graduation, as expediently as possible.
And these rules would apply specifically to students who are classified as homeless, would not necessarily apply to non-homeless.
That's correct, yeah. But this regulation just pertains to homeless students. Certainly, we think there are many local districts who are doing many of these components already and are doing their very best to ensure that these students, as well as other transient populations of students, are acquiring credit as quickly and efficiently as possible, and like I said, not having to do duplicative work. Is there anything else that you want to add on that?
Milton, did you have a question?
Yeah, question. After reading the reg and looking at it several times, it seemed like to me, maybe I'm reading more into it than was there. Is it like we are doing the benefit of the doubt, or have these young people, these kids, have they completed the course? Are we guessing? Say one child come from Jefferson County, goes to Oldham County or wherever. This is where I guess I'm a little tangled at. Are we saying that this course will equal that course even though they might not be the same thing? So are we getting the same credit hours? This is what I'm guessing.
Not necessarily. Certainly, the regulation is encouraging, and really there's some requirements that, for example, the counselor in the school where the student is transferring into must make contact with the prior counselor and really encourages that individual to have this now requires personal direct contact. So they'll have to physically pick up the phone and call and say, what are the educational records, what courses was the student in, send us as much information as quickly as possible. And no, there's not anything in the regulation that's going to mandate that a district grant credit if two courses don't seem comparable, or if it doesn't appear that the coursework was successfully completed. We haven't gone into the detail of defining what successfully completed means, but I think, again, as Dr. Sims said in a prior discussion, I think it's because it's commonly understood of what successful completion would be. So we are frankly leaving a lot of discretion to the local districts to make some of these decisions, and I think that's because we recognize and hope that the board recognizes that districts are doing things very differently. They have different resources at their disposal. Some have a great deal more of a population of homeless students than others, and we don't want to discourage in any way the good practices that are already happening. We just want to hone in on some additional best practices and things that could really, like I said, improve the educational outcomes for these students.
I think this also allows for some intentionality, some checks and balances to make, we don't want to penalize the children because they are considered homeless. So let's really make that extra effort to make sure that the credits they've already received are going to count for something.
I want to add, just to echo Kelly and Whitney's point, I think a lot of districts are already doing this.
Okay.
So I think there are a lot of districts where a kid who is transient, who's classified as homeless by the McKinney-Vento Act's definition, they are looking at a kid's transcript, looking at their courses, and are already doing whatever they can to award comparable credit. What this bill is intended to do is to ensure that regardless of what that district is, that the district is looking at that kid's courses and thinking twice, even if it's not that exact same course. Because it could happen in some districts sometimes where it's not the exact same course, content doesn't look exactly the same, not the same name, you could say it's a different course. This kind of forces you to look twice and say, given the context and the challenges this kid is dealing with, let's make sure we're taking every effort. The other thing I'd add with respect to your question about the legislation, Gary, I think is important to the spirit of House Bill 378, and it relates to minimum high school graduation requirements. Right. I think it touches on Milton's question as well. So House Bill 378, nothing requiring the board to do anything in terms of regs, but says that these students can be awarded a high school diploma if they meet the minimum state requirements for high school diplomas. So if you take, in districts where both of you are, Warren County, Jefferson County, it's not uncommon at all for those districts to have graduation requirements over and above what those state minimums are. House Bill 378 says those students can be awarded a high school diploma without the additional district-imposed requirements, but with the state requirements.
And after 2 years of seat time, they have to have,
They have to have completed their second year of high
Okay.
school.
Second
Yes, that's
year,
what the
okay.
statute now says.
Got it. I wanted to ask about that too, to clarify exactly what that meant, so that's helpful.
The only other changes that I would point out, unless there are other questions about those components, we are going to revise the title of the regulation. When this reg was last amended back in 2017, some components regarding foster children was incorporated, and no concerns with that. There are a great deal of interconnectedness in the two populations, but we didn't specify it in the regulation title. I think it wouldn't necessarily be intuitive to the public and to others to look into this regulation to find things related to foster care liaisons. So we have added that component to the title. We've also set that aside in its own own section so that it's distinguished from the requirements around homeless students. The other substantive changes, again, we just recently amended this reg in 2017. We would not have opened the regulation up just to make these changes, but since we did have to because of the recent legislative change, we clarified some things in Section 4 regarding the dispute resolution processes. It references a lot the local district homeless liaison, but it doesn't clarify which one, and every district must have one. There's 172 of them, and there was often, I think, maybe some confusion arising on, is it the district that's enrolling the homeless child? Is it where the homeless child technically resides? So we're just going to make that very clear that it is in the district of enrollment. That liaison will lead the dispute resolution process. We also clarified there's some guidance from the federal government that says if the dispute is between two districts, then the state homeless education coordinator will resolve that dispute. So we have clarified that. And the only other two components, we've put some timeframes around the dispute resolution process. That also came from conversations with the U.S. Department of Education as we were getting our consolidated state plan under ESSA approved. And what they said was, you need more firm timelines around the dispute resolution process. So it is already in our state plan, but it was not in our regulation. So we're now making it clear that from the time a dispute originates at the local level, the local district liaison in the district of enrollment has 30 student attendance days to resolve that. And then if the dispute raises to the state level, we will have 20 student attendance days. So again, that's not a change in practice. That was already in our state plan. But now that we're opening the reg back up, we're going to go ahead and codify that into the law. And those are the most substantive changes, but certainly if you have questions about other components that I didn't touch on, I'm happy to discuss those more at length.
Was there any feedback from the local superintendent's advisory council about this that was?
There were no concerns from LSAC that were expressed. I think we may have had a couple of clarifying questions, but no recommendations for any language changes or any concerns that were that were raised.
Okay.
They will see it again though for a second reading in November, as will this committee.
Okay. Okay.
All right, very good.
Thank you all.
We'll take a look at it again next time.
Thank you all.
Our last review item here is amendment to 704 KAR 370, Kentucky Framework for Personnel Evaluation. We have Deputy Commissioner Ellis, Division Director Todd Davis, and Special Counsel Cassie Trueblood.
I'm going to turn it over to them. They've done the legwork on this.
Okie dokie.
We're glad that you're really familiar with this.
I
part.
had a front row seat.
Well, good afternoon. 704 KAR 3370 establishes the Kentucky Framework for Professional Personnel Evaluations, and Section 8, subsection 2, currently sets the principal and assistant principal performance standards as the measure for districts to use for evaluations for principals and assistant principals. The amendment before you, which is also summarized on your screen, replaces the principal and assistant principal performance standards with the professional standards for educational leaders, also known as the PSEL. PSEL are national student-centric standards, and each of those 10 standards do tie back to the success and well-being of each student. The Education Professional Standards Board adopted PSEL as the standards for preparation for all advanced educational leaders, including principals. So this adoption of PSEL would create a consistency of standards from preparation through the career continuum. The use of PSEL as this measure was also presented to the Principal Advisory Council and the Local Superintendent's Advisory Council. Both councils were supportive. Todd and I are here to answer any questions you may have.
So the main thing here is that we're saying we're no longer using ISLIC, we're now using PSEL to evaluate our administrators. I know there's also a guidance document that's in development around sort of a recommended framework for evaluation. That's not under consideration at this point. That's still in process.
Yes, that would not be incorporated by reference. It would just be provided as guidance to districts.
Okay, understood. All right. Thanks. This is all good. Updating the profession. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Timely.
Appreciate you all.
Thank you all.
All right, I think that concludes our agenda for the committee. And again, we did not take action on our action items because of lack of quorum. We'll bring those items to the full board for a vote tomorrow. And the review items we'll just make the full board aware of. So Milton, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting unless there's other business you want to discuss?
No, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
All right, and I'll second that. Are we in favor?
All in favor?
Aye. All right. Our committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.